Dark skies, roaring engines, and the faint hum of drones cutting through the silence of night. Across Europe, people look up in fear, not because of incoming storms, but because of an empire desperately lashing out as its lifeline begins to collapse. Russia, once a superpower built on black gold, oil, gas, and diesel, now finds its empire cracking. The unshakable foundation of its economy is evaporating before the world's eyes. And the more Moscow tries to project strength abroad, the clearer it becomes the empire is running out of fuel, literally. For decades, Russia's vast reserves of oil and natural gas gave it the power to intimidate its neighbors, bankroll wars, and strangle Europe's energy supply with a single turn of the tap. But today, in the aftermath of countless Ukrainian strikes, sabotage operations, and international sanctions, that dominance is unraveling at a staggering pace. What happens when an empire built on oil begins to suffocate? Tonight, the answer may be more dramatic than anyone expected. The first chilling sign came not in Russia itself, but in Denmark. Overnight, drones were spotted across the entire country, hovering near airports, circling above military installations, even appearing over Denmark's vital oil and gas platforms in the North Sea. Air bases hosting advanced F-35 and F-16 fighter jets were under the watchful eye of unidentified drones. Airports were shut down. Panic spread as the government confirmed it was not one isolated incident, but a coordinated operation targeting multiple sites simultaneously. The Danish defense minister stood before the nation, admitting the obvious. The country lacked the tools to stop these drones. This wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was systematic, and all signs pointed back to Moscow. And here lies the terrifying irony. Russia is striking outward with drones while back home, its own fuel reserves are crumbling. The empire that once used oil and gas as weapons of power is now struggling to keep its own vehicles moving. Across occupied Crimea, gas stations have gone silent. As of late September, there is no gasoline. Not premium, not regular, nothing. Roads are eerily empty. Public minibuses are jam-packed as frustrated civilians openly blame the Kremlin's leadership for their failure. What began as scattered shortages in Russia's remote regions has spiraled into a nationwide crisis. By mid-September, 21 regions across Russia, from the Far East to central industrial hubs, reported fuel shortages. Gasoline prices have surged by 40 to 50% in just months. Even in Moscow and St. Petersburg, the heart of Russia's wealth rationing has begun. Lukoil, one of the country's energy giants, has stopped selling fuel in canisters and suspended fuel card programs. This isn't just inconvenience, it is collapse in motion. But the most devastating twist is how this crisis extends into the military. For years, analysts assumed the Russian armed forces would be immune since their tanks and armored carriers run mostly on diesel. Yet the war has forced Russia to adapt. With heavy losses, Moscow began relying on smaller vehicles, jeeps, vans, even motorcycles. All of them require gasoline, and now that gasoline is running dry, even diesel, once considered safe, is slipping away. Ukrainian drones have struck refinery columns across Russia, destroying critical European and American-built equipment Moscow cannot replace. Each strike ripples through the system, cutting production not just of gasoline but diesel as well. Without both, Russia's economy and war machine grind closer to paralysis. The driving force behind this collapse isn't sanctions alone, it's Ukraine's evolving drone and missile campaign. In Bashkortostan, deep inside Russia, one of the nation's largest refineries at Salavat was engulfed in flames after Ukrainian strikes. Belgorod, Astrakhan, and even facilities owned by Gazprom have been hit and shut down. Ukraine's ingenuity has stunned observers. Balloons carrying drones drift into Moscow, forcing Russian planes to fly dangerously low over city rooftops. In Novorossiysk and Tuapse, drone boats slip across the sea to strike oil-pumping stations that feed Russia's massive export tankers. Each attack slices another artery of Moscow's oil empire. The effect is devastating. Without oil revenues, the Kremlin loses its most reliable stream of foreign currency. Without refineries, the domestic economy suffers. And without gasoline or diesel, the Russian military cannot sustain modern warfare. But there is another dimension to this. For Ukrainians, these successful strikes are more than tactical victories. They are psychological breakthroughs. After years of grinding war, morale wavered. Doubts grew. Could Ukraine really win? Then came the strikes. Videos of oil depots erupting in flames, of drones reaching hundreds of kilometers into Russia, of Moscow itself rattled by attacks. Suddenly, the impossible felt possible again. Even controversial Ukrainian commanders have seen their reputations transformed. Figures once dismissed as mere showmen, like the drone warfare leader known as Madyar, are now hailed as heroes. His strategies, once mocked, are crippling Russia's oil infrastructure and restoring belief in victory. Every column destroyed, every refinery silenced, strengthens not only Ukraine's military position, but its national spirit. But as Russia falters, it lashes out in brutality. In Kherson, civilians were bombarded with cluster munitions traced back not to Russian stockpiles, but to North Korea. The discovery confirmed what many feared. Moscow is now importing banned weapons from Pyongyang to sustain its war. Elsewhere, intercepted communications revealed Russian soldiers ordered to execute entire families, sparing only children to be abducted. Such crimes expose not strength, but desperation. A regime resorting to terror as its strategic situation worsens. Even manpower is slipping. Reports from inside Russia tell conflicting stories. Some claim recruitment numbers are high, while others admit the military is scraping the bottom of the barrel. The Kremlin has now introduced year-round conscription, meaning young men can be drafted at any time. Officially, conscripts are not supposed to serve in Ukraine. In reality, they are pressured, coerced, and manipulated into signing contracts that send them straight to the front. What should be routine service has become a conveyor belt into a war most do not want to fight. And the problem is only getting worse. Casualties mount, resources dwindle, even Russia's propaganda channels admit the system is stretched thin. Perhaps most symbolic of Russia's unraveling is the response from its so-called allies. For months, Moscow relied on trade with Beijing to cushion the blow of Western sanctions, but now even China is pulling back. Subsidies for imports of Russian copper and nickel have been canceled, signaling Beijing's growing unease with being tied too closely to a failing empire. This is more than economic policy. It is a message. Even China sees the writing on the wall. Russia's oil empire, once a pillar of its global influence, is collapsing under the combined weight of Ukrainian strikes, international sanctions, and its own internal rot. The world is watching a transformation unlike any in modern history. An energy empire that once held Europe hostage is now being starved from within. Moscow's attempts to intimidate its neighbors with drones only highlight its vulnerability back home. Each refinery lost, each convoy stranded without fuel, each ally that turns away accelerates the decline. Russia's leaders may still talk of strength, but the reality is undeniable. The empire is cracking. And unlike in the past, no amount of propaganda or intimidation can reverse the course. The age of Russian oil dominance is over, and what comes next may change the balance of global power for generations. The fall of the Soviet Union was defined by empty shelves, unpaid wages, and the collapse of central control. Today, a new collapse is underway, one fueled not by ideology, but by the destruction of Russia's most vital resource. Oil built Russia. Oil empowered Russia. And now, the loss of oil may very well bring Russia to its knees. The empire that once threatened Europe with energy blackmail is now rationing gasoline at home. The military that once promised unstoppable force now struggles to fuel its trucks. The Kremlin that once boasted of invincibility now faces strikes that burn its lifeline to ash. Russia's oil empire is not just weakening, it is crashing. And when it finally falls, the world will witness the true cost of building power on a foundation of oil and watching it burn away.